Welcome back to Good Morning Sri Lanka on MTV Sports. We were taking a look at the headlines and the stories that's been happening over the past week. But now we have Ms. Anuradha Herath in the studio to have a discussion in depth about the presidential elections. And good morning to you.
Good morning to you as well.
How did you feel, just your opinion before we start off, how do you feel the presidential debate, the second presidential debate worked out, as an overview of the debate?
I think it went much better, obviously, than the first one, as many people are saying. We saw both candidates go sort of head-to-head with each other. Obama obviously had learned his lesson from the first one and didn't sort of shy away from pointing out certain things that Governor Romney was saying. Mm-hmm. So I think overall the performance of both of the candidates was much better than the first one.
And it somewhat served the purpose of a presidential debate, but then again a lot of criticism that it didn't serve the whole town hall format because they were not really answering the questions that was posed by the audience, but was delivering their prepared speeches and just covering their points. But before we get into that, let's take a look at the previous week's debate, which was the vice presidential debate between Vice President Joe Biden and Paul Ryan. There we go. That is a version of the vice presidential debate, and the highlights of it was very entertaining. I would say it was a much more engaging debate, in my opinion. Now, talking about statistics, many people didn't expect Joe Biden to come up with a load of statistics, and Paul Ryan was more of the person who would use statistics as his main strength. Now, but then again, he brought that in, and how did that contribute to the whole turn of events?
Yeah, well, I think that particular clip, although it was entertaining, we didn't see much of the substance in that particular clip, but there was a lot of substance from both sides. And of course, Paul Ryan is known as this quote-unquote numbers guy because he has a budget plan and he knows his facts very well. And yes, people, as you said, people weren't expecting Joe Biden to come up with those facts as well, but he did because he knew he had to rectify what had happened from the first presidential debate. So it turned out to be this very sort of informative debate, much compared to the presidential debate where Joe Biden was also sort of giving out facts and figures and things like that, and it wasn't just Romney who was doing that.
Exactly. And
I'm sorry, not Romney, Paul Ryan.
Yeah, exactly. But just to look at he was very relaxed and he was very he was basically taking control, the Vice President Joe Biden. But do you think this was a bit too harsh? And people say there's a bit of criticism that this was too much.
Well, I think that is the main criticism that Joe Biden is getting. But then people who have watched Vice President Biden knows that this is his style, right? It doesn't matter if it's a televised debate or if it's at a rally or at a meeting or whatever. But this is his style. He just speaks his mind. And yes, people are criticizing. Maybe he laughed too much, and as a vice president, he should have been a little bit more professional, maybe, or a little bit calmer and not laughing so much and things like that. But then that's who Joe Biden is.
Yeah, exactly. He was just doing what he's best at. And a lot of people say that the vice presidential debate may not have a bigger impact or a significant impact on the entire presidential run through. So what, in your opinion, does it really serve?
That's true. I mean, if you look historically back at debates, ever since they've been televised debates, it's true that the vice presidential debate doesn't really make much of an impact because when you're going to the polls, people vote for the next president, really, of the United States of America. Mm-hmm. However, when it came to this particular debate, I think it'll be true in the overall scheme of things. When this whole process is over, I think we'll still find that the vice presidential debate, although it was useful and entertaining at this particular moment, would not have changed people's minds much about who they're going to vote for, whether it's President Obama or Governor Romney. But at this particular moment, it's sort of the useful purpose of showing us, can the vice president step up to the plate if something should happen to the president, which is that person's main role. Mm-hmm. And if you remember in the last presidential election where Vice President Biden was debating Sarah Palin, that really worked against the Republican campaign because we really felt that Sarah Palin was not ready for that level of a responsibility. Mm-hmm. Whereas here, Paul Ryan is definitely much more aware of his responsibilities and perhaps more prepared, but then compared to Joe Biden, who has decades of experience in politics, we're not sure. But then that's what I think people got from the vice presidential debate.
Exactly. My next question probably would have been whether you think, you share the majority view that Paul Ryan may not be ready yet. Is there anything that he can change? Is there anything that will change within the next few weeks?
Well, I'm not exactly sure if that's the majority opinion yet, whether Paul Ryan is not ready or not. I think there's a lot of people who feel that he is ready, because he is a very intellectual person who does have some experience in Washington, and so you cannot really sort of put him aside saying he's not ready at the moment. It really depends on, I think, the presidential debates. The vice presidents will be there, and they will, of course, help in that campaign process. But the ultimate decision, when voters make that ultimate decision, it will be because of President Obama and Governor Mitt Romney.
Exactly, and because of as you said, the main important feature is the presidential debate. Let's move on to that, which is much more current. Talking about you just mentioned that it was much better than last time. Some people actually say that Obama was actually, although there was a lot of criticisms that he was on the back foot last time, he got Governor Romney to say some things that he might really regret in the future.
That's true. I mean, the president was very more proactive, I suppose, if you could say, instead of just sitting back and not answering some of the points that Mitt Romney brought up, like in the first debate. He actually made it a point to counter those particular points within that debate itself. So in that sense, I think President Obama did, perform better, as most people are saying. But if you really look at the facts that were discussed, I mean, a lot of organizations are doing fact checks after the fact, and you find that even President Obama said certain things that weren't entirely true. Just like Governor Romney also said things that weren't entirely true. So there are both sides, to look at there.
And talking about fact checks, a lot of entrepreneurs say that the unemployment rates that were recorded, a sudden drop below the 8% mark, was very questionable.
I'm not sure if it's the questionable aspect. People are interpreting it different ways, and I think President Obama, said it was because of his administration that the numbers were so good and that they created so many jobs during his particular tenure. But at the same time, I think both candidates are using different marks for their own benefit. For example, I read in one report where President Obama was using it from around 2010 or something, the jobs, saying that they were able to create so many jobs. Whereas if you look at from the time he took office, that number might be different, so the amount of jobs created might not be so large, depending on where you start, the time frame.
Exactly.
So those types of subjective things are there.
Right, and for those of you who missed out on watching the debate, here are some of the highlights of the second presidential debate. Welcome back to Good Morning Sri Lanka on MTV Sports. We were just having a discussion about the US presidential elections and specifically about the US presidential debate, the second one that just happened 2 days back. And we were talking about jobs and their approaches towards the two candidates' approaches towards jobs and also looking at businesses. Now let me just come to energy, which was the next topic that was discussed. Now, in my opinion, my personal opinion, Mitt Romney's suggestion of drilling more and using up the resources they have, he's slightly ignorant of the fact that these are non-renewable resources, and he is under the notion that we will have oil forever and ever.
I don't really think it's ignorance, on his part, but I think it's this concept of wanting to be energy independent without having to rely on other countries for most of the oil needs of the U.S. population, which is where I think he's going with that, saying that we need to get it from our sources and not turn to other countries for our oil, because that creates political problems, this dependence for whatever reason really creates other problems, in political arenas and economically. So I think that's what he's really getting at.
And President Obama was very specific, and he put him on the spot when he said that a couple of years back when he was governor, he stood in front of a coal plant and says, this plant kills, and then now he's in support of coal and he says, I like coal. And what are your thoughts about this change of events? Is he just trying to do this because of the run-up to the presidential elections?
Well, that's the criticism that Governor Romney is getting, that, saying that he said certain things when he was running for governor because he wanted to win that election. Now he's saying certain different things, because he's running for the presidential election. So he's, switching not just on this energy issue, but on other issues like abortion and things like that also, that he's, changed his mind quite a bit. So that obviously is the criticism that he's getting.
And going on to taxes, as you mentioned earlier, why these top folks, folks at the top rather, the probably the 1% or the few more percentages that are at the top, like Mitt Romney's policies are, because they might be enjoying, lesser taxes comparatively. So do you think that that he will be able to sustain this in terms of financing these the policies of keeping taxes the same?
Well, I mean, that's what we don't really know, because we don't know too much of the details. If you remember, even in the vice presidential debate, they were trying to get at some of these details. The moderator, if you remember, was asking Paul Ryan, do you have more information? Do you have more details on your plan? Or does that mean that you don't have any details? So they've put out this proposal overall, but we still don't know exactly how they're going to fund all these. They say they're cutting spending, and that's why they got a lot of pushback on mentioning PBS and Big Bird and all this type of stuff, saying that that's really minuscule cuts compared to some of the other larger programs. And so how are you really going to fund this particular plan that you're proposing? So we don't really know too much of the details yet.
Linking up, and he says also that he's going to cut down on the deductions on pensions and allowances. Now, how is that going to, once again, his idea of these pensioners and people who rely on allowances being some sort of like parasites, how much will that affect him as things go on?
The way it'll affect him is because he does need votes of the middle class. That's what we're always saying, this 47% issue that you saw on the clip, where he was saying, no, I support 100%, I want to take care of 100% of the population. And Barack Obama was just quick to say, he thinks 47% of us are just sort of leeches, using trying to live off the government and so forth. And that's what they're really going at. He definitely needs to convince those middle income people that he will take care of their needs as well, and not just look after the interests of the very rich.
And talking about security and foreign policy, let's just this debate was specifically meant to be focused more on foreign policy, but as we went along we found that it was a very generalized debate where the contenders were actually proposing and kind of repeating what they said in the previous debate as well. Why do you think that they took that approach in going forward with the debate?
Well, I think the overall thing is, I don't think foreign policy is really going to play that big of a deal in this particular election when it comes to voters. You talk about the Libya issue, you talk about Iran and the Middle East and some of the activities going on there, but when it really comes down to it, people in the US really care about their day-to-day lives and how it affects them, So yes, the Libya incident happened, and maybe certain things that shouldn't have happened, did with respect to, not providing security and so forth. But in the end, does it really affect my daily life, day-to-day paying taxes and health care and these types of issues? So I think we're going to see more and more discussion about domestic issues rather than foreign issues in the next 3 weeks.
As much as those security concerns may not really come into play for the voters' mind, do you think things like the handling, or the approach to handling China will affect the voters' choice?
Not that much, really. I mean, you talk about outsourcing of jobs, and that's important to the economy and things like that. But there are other issues. I mean, yes, China could be an issue when it comes to competitiveness and how, U.S. fares in the world with these emerging powers like China and India and other countries. But for voters, when you're picking a president for your own country, it's like the really day-to-day issues like taxes and healthcare and employment really are the issues that will really matter.
And I think going forward in the next few weeks, they will probably focus more on those, because they would have realized that actually it's the domestic policy and the policy that they're going to adopt for which will affect the people's day-to-day lives that really matter. So with that, we will have to wrap up today's edition of Good Morning Sri Lanka. Thank you very much, Anuradha Herath, for joining us, and we will be back again on Monday on Good Morning Sri Lanka, and stay tuned to MTV Sports.